Imagine someone who has everything, but nothing that really matters. Wyatt Chambers, a lonely billionaire, decided to pretend to be poor to find true love. What happened when he met Natalie, a woman who despised wealth and valued authenticity? The answer will surprise you. In a world where relationships are built on apps and superficial interests, this story reveals a shocking lesson: love can't be bought, but it can be lost with a lie. Get ready for a journey of hidden identity, emotional plot twist, and an ending that proves love beyond wealth isn't just possible, it's transformative. Do you believe true love can conquer money? What happens next will leave you speechless. Wyatt Chambers had it all: private jets, penthouse views, and a net worth that could buy small countries. But behind the tailored suits and champagne toasts, his heart echoed with loneliness. "What's the point of wealth if no one sees you?" he'd mutter, staring at empty invitations to galas filled with people who loved his money, not his mind. The shock of realizing he'd become a target for gold diggers haunted him. So, he hatched a plan: disappear into a world where his name meant nothing. A hidden identity, a humble apartment, and a job at a local bookstore. Would anyone care for the man behind the disguise? He traded Rolexes for thrift store flannels, and suddenly, life slowed down. At the bookstore, customers called him the new guy, not Mr. Chambers. For the first time, laughter felt real, not a performance for shareholders. But doubts crept in: could someone love him for who he was, not what he had? The billionaire in disguise wrestled with guilt, yet the unexpected romance he craved felt closer here, amid paperbacks and coffee stains, than in any boardroom. One rainy afternoon, a woman dashed into the store, drenched and laughing at her own clumsiness. Natalie Winslow. Her smile didn't glitter, it glowed. She debated Hemingway versus Austen with him, oblivious to his net worth. Wyatt's chest tightened. Real feelings? Or just the thrill of the charade? He scribbled her coffee order on a napkin: oat milk latte, extra cinnamon. A tiny lie, but it tasted like hope. Natalie's world was simple: freelance gigs, yoga at dawn, and a cat named Tolstoy. She joked about her 5-year plan to open a cafe, unaware Wyatt could fund it with pocket change. He envied her hustle, her humble heart. But every time she said, "You're such a good listener," guilt gnawed at him. Love versus money wasn't just a trope, it was his life now. They spent weekends at flea markets, Natalie haggling over $5 lamps while Wyatt marveled at her joy. "Rich people miss out on this," she'd say, waving a vintage scarf. He'd laugh, but inside, panic flared. What happens next when she discovers the truth? The fake identity felt flimsier each day. Yet, her hand in his. That felt like destiny. Paragraph 06. One evening, Natalie confessed her fear of being too ordinary for love. Wyatt's throat dried. "You're extraordinary," he wanted to say. But the words stuck. How could he preach authenticity while living a lie? The emotional plot twist brewed silently. As streetlights flickered outside her apartment, he wondered, is this love, or a time bomb? Paragraph 07. When Natalie gifted him a dog-eared copy of The Alchemist, "For your next adventure," Wyatt froze. Paulo Coelho's words mocked him: "When you want something, the universe conspires, but what if the universe hated liars?" That night, he stared at her contact name, Natalie, Love, and debated deleting it. Instead, he typed, "Coffee tomorrow?" The screen glowed, always. The secret millionaire smiled. For now, the lie lived on. Wyatt's decision to hide his wealth wasn't impulsive, it was a lesson learned from years of hollow relationships. He'd seen friends marry for status, only to divorce in bitter lawsuits. Love shouldn't come with a price tag, he'd tell himself, but society disagreed. So, he stepped into a world where his name meant nothing. A shockingly romantic experiment, some might say. But for Wyatt, it was survival. Could he find someone who loved him, not his bank account? The first week was brutal. He fumbled with a coffee machine, burned toast, and realized he'd never truly lived. Natalie teased him, "You're like a lost puppy," unaware he'd never had to fend for himself. Yet, her patience felt genuine. No one expected the billionaire in disguise to struggle, but here he was, learning life's basics from a woman who didn't own a single designer handbag. Natalie's world was refreshingly uncomplicated. She talked about her dreams, opening a cafe, traveling to Bali, without a hint of entitlement. Wyatt admired her grit, her humble heart. But every time she said, "You're so down to earth," guilt gnawed at him. Would she still think that if she knew the truth? The true love test was turning into a minefield. One evening, over cheap wine, Natalie confessed her fear of being too ordinary for love. Wyatt's chest tightened. "You're extraordinary," he wanted to say. But how could he, when his entire existence was a lie? The emotional plot twist loomed, and he wasn't ready. Instead, he poured her another glass and changed the subject. As weeks turned into months, Wyatt's double life became harder to maintain. He'd catch himself almost slipping, mentioning a luxury resort he'd read about or a Michelin-starred chef he'd seen on TV. Natalie never suspected, but the guilt weighed on him. What happens next when she finds out? The fake identity felt like a ticking time bomb. Yet, there were moments that felt too real to ignore. Like when Natalie dragged him to a karaoke bar, and he sang off-key to Bon Jovi. Or when she surprised him with homemade lasagna after a long day. This is what love feels like, he realized. Not grand gestures, but small, unforgettable revelations. But could it survive the truth? One night, as they strolled through the park, Natalie squeezed his hand and said, "You're the most real person I've ever met." Wyatt's heart sank. If only you knew. The secret millionaire smiled, but inside, he was crumbling. The lie was getting harder to carry, but the thought of losing her. That was unbearable. Natalie Winslow wasn't like anyone Wyatt had ever met. She didn't wear designer labels or drop names at parties. Instead, she wore mismatched socks and quoted obscure poets. The first time she walked into the bookstore, drenched from the rain and laughing at her own clumsiness, Wyatt was captivated. She was real, unapologetically, refreshingly real. And for a man used to masks, her authenticity was a shock to his system. Their conversations were effortless. She debated the merits of Hemingway versus Austen, argued passionately about climate change, and once spent an hour explaining why pineapple does belong on pizza. Wyatt found himself hanging on her every word. No one expected the billionaire in disguise to fall for a woman who carried her lunch in a reusable tote, but here he was, utterly smitten. Natalie had a way of seeing the world that made Wyatt question everything. "Rich people miss out on so much," she'd say, haggling over a $5 lamp at a flea market. He'd laugh, but her words stuck with him. For the first time, he wondered if his wealth had been a barrier, not a blessing. The humble heart he admired in her was teaching him lessons he'd never learned in boardrooms. Their connection deepened with every shared moment. Whether it was binge-watching bad reality TV or arguing over the best way to make grilled cheese, Wyatt felt more alive with Natalie than he ever had in his penthouse. But the guilt lingered. What happens next when she discovers the truth? The fake identity felt like a shadow, always lurking. One evening, Natalie opened up about her past, her struggles as a freelance writer, her dream of opening a cafe, her fear of never being enough. Wyatt listened, his heart aching. "You're more than enough," he wanted to say. But how could he, when his entire life was a lie? The emotional plot twist was brewing, and he wasn't ready to face it. Yet, there were moments that felt too real to ignore. Like when Natalie surprised him with tickets to a local band's concert, or when she stayed up all night helping him brainstorm ideas for a fictional novel he'd always wanted to write. This is what love feels like, he realized. Not grand gestures, but small, unforgettable revelations. But could it survive the truth? As they walked home one night, Natalie squeezed his hand and said, "You're the most real person I've ever met." Wyatt's heart sank. If only you knew. The secret millionaire smiled, but inside, he was crumbling. The lie was getting harder to carry, but the thought of losing her. That was unbearable. Wyatt Chambers had always lived in a world of privilege, where every whim was catered to and every problem solved with a phone call. But now, he was navigating a life he'd never known, one where budgets mattered, and splurging meant ordering an extra topping on pizza. The shock of this new reality was both humbling and exhausting. For the first time, he understood what it meant to truly struggle, and it was a lesson he hadn't seen coming. Simple tasks became challenges. He burned toast, overpaid for groceries, and once accidentally locked himself out of his apartment. Natalie found it endearing. "You're like a lost puppy," she'd tease, unaware that the billionaire in disguise had never had to fend for himself. But her patience and laughter made the struggles worth it. For Wyatt, it was a crash course in humility and love. The more time he spent in Natalie's world, the more he realized how much he'd been missing. She showed him the joy of thrift store finds, the satisfaction of a home-cooked meal, and the beauty of a sunset viewed from a park bench. These were things money couldn't buy, and they left him questioning everything he thought he knew about happiness. The humble heart he admired in her was teaching him lessons he'd never learned in boardrooms. But the guilt was always there, lurking beneath the surface. Every time Natalie praised his simplicity or called him down-to-earth, Wyatt felt a pang of remorse. What happens next when she discovers the truth? The fake identity felt like a ticking time bomb, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep it up. Yet, there were moments that felt too real to ignore. Like when Natalie dragged him to a karaoke bar, and he sang off-key to Bon Jovi. Or when she surprised him with homemade lasagna after a long day. This is what love feels like, he realized. Not grand gestures, but small, unforgettable revelations. But could it survive the truth? One night, as they strolled through the park, Natalie squeezed his hand and said, "You're the most real person I've ever met." Wyatt's heart sank. If only you knew. The secret millionaire smiled, but inside, he was crumbling. The lie was getting harder to carry, but the thought of losing her. That was unbearable. As the days turned into weeks, Wyatt found himself torn between two worlds. The life he'd built with Natalie felt more real than anything he'd ever known, but the weight of his secret was becoming too much to bear. What happens next? He didn't know, but one thing was certain, the true love test was far from over. There came a point when Wyatt stopped thinking of his double life as an experiment. The lines between his fake identity and his real self began to blur. Natalie's laughter, her hand in his, the way she looked at him like he was the only person in the room, it all felt too real. The true love test was no longer just a test, it was his life. And that terrified him. One evening, as they sat on her couch watching a rom-com, Natalie rested her head on his shoulder. "You're different," she said softly. "You actually see me." Wyatt's chest tightened. If only you knew, he thought. But in that moment, he realized he wasn't pretending anymore. He did see her, more clearly than he'd seen anyone in years. The emotional plot twist was that he was falling for her, and there was no going back. Their shared moments became his lifeline. Whether it was cooking dinner together, and failing miserably, or debating the best way to organize a bookshelf, Wyatt found himself forgetting about his penthouse, his fortune, his old life. Natalie's world was vibrant, messy, and full of love, everything his wasn't. The humble heart he admired in her was teaching him lessons he'd never learned in boardrooms. But the guilt was always there, lurking beneath the surface. Every time Natalie praised his simplicity or called him down-to-earth, Wyatt felt a pang of remorse. What happens next when she discovers the truth? The fake identity felt like a ticking time bomb, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep it up. Yet, there were moments that felt too real to ignore. Like when Natalie surprised him with tickets to a local band's concert, or when she stayed up all night helping him brainstorm ideas for a fictional novel he'd always wanted to write. This is what love feels like, he realized. Not grand gestures, but small, unforgettable revelations. But could it survive the truth? One night, as they walked home from a late-night diner, Natalie squeezed his hand and said, "You're the most real person I've ever met." Wyatt's heart sank. If only you knew. The secret millionaire smiled, but inside, he was crumbling. The lie was getting harder to carry, but the thought of losing her. That was unbearable. As the days turned into weeks, Wyatt found himself torn between two worlds. The life he built with Natalie felt more real than anything he'd ever known, but the weight of his secret was becoming too much to bear. What happens next? He didn't know, but one thing was certain, the true love test was far from over. The cracks began to show on a mundane Tuesday. Natalie mentioned a luxury resort in the Maldives, and Wyatt casually replied, "Oh, the infinity pools there are overrated." Her eyebrow arched. "How would you know?" she laughed. He froze. No one expected a bookstore clerk to critique five-star hotels. A quick save, saw it on a travel blog. But the shock in her eyes lingered. The fake identity was starting to fray. Later that week, Natalie's best friend, Jess, grilled him over drinks. "You're mysterious," she said, swirling her wine. Wyatt forced a smile, but Jess's stare felt like an interrogation. Was he a target now? Jess dropped hints about trust issues and hidden agendas, making him sweat. Natalie brushed it off. Jess is just protective, but the emotional plot twist was brewing. What happens next if Jess digs deeper? Wyatt's nightmares grew vivid, Natalie walking away, tears streaming, shouting, "You lied." He'd wake up clutching his chest, wondering if love beyond wealth was even possible. By day, he'd watch Natalie chat with regulars at the bookstore, her humble heart shining. Could she forgive a rich man pretending to be poor? The guilt became a shadow he couldn't shake. Then came the charity gala invitation. Natalie's boss donated tickets, and she begged Wyatt to go. "It's black tie. We can pretend we're fancy," she joked. Panic surged. He'd attended that very event last year. "I hate suits," he stammered. Natalie frowned. "Since when?" The unexpected romance was colliding with his hidden identity, and you won't believe how close he came to blurting the truth. To distract her, Wyatt planned a fancy picnic in the park, complete with dollar store champagne and a blanket laid over dead grass. Natalie adored it. "This is better than any gala," she sighed, leaning into him. But her trust cut deeper than any lie. The secret millionaire wondered, is this betrayal or destiny? The breaking point came when Natalie found a receipt for a $500 donation to her favorite charity, in his jacket. "How?" she whispered. Wyatt paled. "A mistake," he lied. But her stare held doubt. "You're full of surprises," she said, half smiling. The unforgettable revelation hung in the air, unspoken. The truth changes everything, but would it destroy them? That night, Wyatt stared at his reflection, gripping the edge of the sink. Tell her. Now. But fear paralyzed him. What if she walked away? What if love couldn't survive the shockingly romantic lie? As rain tapped the window, he made a choice, one more day. Just one more day of her laughter, her hand in his, before the storm. The more Wyatt fell for Natalie, the heavier the lie became. Every time she smiled at him, every time she said, "You're my favorite person," guilt clawed at his chest. The true love test was no longer just an experiment, it was his reality. And the fake identity he'd created felt like a prison. What happens next when she discovers the truth? The thought kept him awake at night. Natalie's trust was unwavering. She shared her dreams, her fears, her past, things she'd never told anyone else. "You're the only one who really gets me," she'd say, her eyes soft with affection. Wyatt's heart ached. If only you knew, he thought. The emotional plot twist was that he loved her too much to lose her, but the lie was becoming unbearable. Their connection deepened in ways Wyatt hadn't expected. They spent weekends exploring flea markets, arguing over the best way to make pancakes, and binge-watching terrible reality TV. Natalie's laughter was his favorite sound, and her humble heart was teaching him lessons he'd never learned in boardrooms. But every time she called him real or genuine, the guilt flared. One evening, Natalie opened up about her fear of being too ordinary for love. Wyatt's throat tightened. "You're extraordinary," he wanted to say. But how could he, when his entire life was a lie? The secret millionaire felt like a fraud, unworthy of her trust. What happens next when she finds out? The question haunted him. Yet, there were moments that felt too real to ignore. Like when Natalie surprised him with tickets to a local band's concert, or when she stayed up all night helping him brainstorm ideas for a fictional novel he'd always wanted to write. This is what love feels like, he realized. Not grand gestures, but small, unforgettable revelations. But could it survive the truth? One night, as they walked home from a late-night diner, Natalie squeezed his hand and said, "You're the most real person I've ever met." Wyatt's heart sank. If only you knew. The secret millionaire smiled, but inside, he was crumbling. The lie was getting harder to carry, but the thought of losing her, that was unbearable. As the days turned into weeks, Wyatt found himself torn between two worlds. The life he'd built with Natalie felt more real than anything he'd ever known, but the weight of his secret was becoming too much to bear. What happens next? He didn't know, but one thing was certain, the true love test was far from over. Wyatt had rehearsed the confession 100 times. He'd imagined sitting Natalie down, looking into her eyes, and saying, "I'm not who you think I am." But every time he got close, fear stopped him. That day, though, felt different. They were at her favorite cafe, and the sunlight caught her smile just right. Now, he thought. Tell her now. But as he opened his mouth, his phone buzzed, a text from his assistant, "Emergency board meeting. Urgent." Natalie noticed his tension. "Everything okay?" she asked, her brow furrowed. Wyatt forced a smile. "Just work stuff." The lie tasted bitter. He excused himself, stepping outside to call his assistant. The meeting was about a hostile takeover of his company, a crisis he couldn't ignore. As he hung up, he felt the weight of his double life crushing him. The fake identity was cracking, and no one expected the timing to be this cruel. When he returned, Natalie was sketching in her notebook, a habit she did when she was deep in thought. "You seem stressed," she said, not looking up. "Want to talk about it?" Wyatt's chest tightened. "This is it. Tell her." But then she added, "You know, you don't have to carry everything alone. I'm here for you." Her words were a lifeline, but they also anchored his guilt. How could he burden her with the truth now? Instead of confessing, Wyatt distracted her with a story about a crazy customer at the bookstore. Natalie laughed, and the moment passed. But as they walked home, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd missed his chance. The emotional plot twist was that the truth was slipping further away, and the lie was becoming harder to untangle. That night, Wyatt lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The board meeting loomed, but so did Natalie's trust. What happens next? He didn't know. The secret millionaire felt trapped between two worlds, each demanding his loyalty. And the unexpected romance he'd found with Natalie? It was the only thing keeping him grounded. The next morning, Natalie surprised him with breakfast in bed, a gesture so sweet it made his chest ache. "You've been working so hard," she said, kissing his forehead. "Thought you deserved a treat." Wyatt's resolve wavered. Tell her, his conscience screamed. But the fear of losing her was louder. As he sipped his coffee, Wyatt made a silent promise, after the board meeting. "I'll tell her everything. But deep down, he wondered if he'd ever find the courage. The true love test was no longer about whether she'd love him for who he was, it was about whether he could face the consequences of his lie. Wyatt couldn't delay the truth any longer. The guilt had become a constant ache, and he knew Natalie deserved honesty. He invited her to the park where they'd shared their first laugh, his hands trembling as he prepared to speak. "There's something I need to tell you," he began, voice shaky. The shockingly romantic moment was here, no more hiding. Natalie tilted her head, curiosity mixing with concern. "You're scaring me," she said, forcing a laugh. Wyatt took a deep breath. "I'm not who you think I am. My name isn't just Wyatt. I'm Wyatt Chambers. The billionaire." The words hung heavy, and Natalie's smile froze. No one expected the silence that followed, not even him. For a heartbeat, she stared, then burst into nervous laughter. "Good one. What's the punchline?" But when Wyatt didn't laugh, her smile faded. "Wait, you're serious?" He nodded, throat tight. The fake identity was crumbling, and there was no turning back. Natalie stood abruptly, pacing away. "So the apartment, the job, all lies?" Her voice cracked. Wyatt's chest clenched. "I wanted someone to love me, not my money. But then I met you," Natalie cut him off. "And you lied. 4 months." The emotional plot twist was here, raw and unrelenting. "I wanted to tell you," Wyatt pleaded. "But I was terrified of losing you." Natalie wiped a tear, her voice steady but cold. "You think trust is something you can buy back?" The true love test had reached its climax, and Wyatt felt his world slipping away. Natalie grabbed her bag, avoiding his gaze. "I need time. Don't call me." As she walked off, Wyatt's knees buckled. The secret millionaire had gambled everything, and lost. Or had he? Natalie paused at the park gate, glancing back once. Betrayal or destiny? The answer was hers to choose. Wyatt sat on the bench until dusk, replaying her words. Was this the end? The unforgettable revelation was that love demanded truth, and he'd failed. But as streetlights flickered on, he whispered, "I'll fight for her. Even if it meant starting from zero." Natalie didn't sleep that night. She paced her apartment, Tolstoy trailing her with worried meows. Wyatt's confession replayed in her mind, "I'm a billionaire." The man she trusted, laughed with, loved, was a stranger. Love versus money wasn't just a cliché anymore, it was her reality. Jess arrived with ice cream and a lecture. Dump him. He's just another rich liar. But Natalie hesitated. What if he's different? Jess rolled her eyes. Different? He's a secret millionaire playing pauper. That's not love, that's a game. Natalie stared at her phone, willing Wyatt to call. He didn't. Days passed. Wyatt respected her silence but left small reminders, her favorite coffee outside her door, a handwritten note, "I'm sorry," Tolstoy's food bowl mysteriously refilled. Each gesture screamed "I'm still here," but Natalie's humble heart warred with anger. How could she forgive this? Then, at the bookstore, she found a dog-eared copy of Pride and Prejudice with a note, "Elizabeth gave Darcy a second chance. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just a conversation." Natalie traced the words, tears blurring the page. The shockingly romantic gesture cracked her resolve. That night, she showed up at his penthouse, heart racing. Wyatt opened the door, hope and fear warring in his eyes. "I don't care about the money," she blurted. "I care that you lied." But, her voice broke. "I miss you." The unexpected romance wasn't dead, just bruised. Wyatt stepped closer, hands trembling. "I'll spend every day proving I'm the man you fell for. No secrets, no lies." Natalie's tears fell freely now. "One step at a time," she whispered. The emotional plot twist was forgiveness, fragile, but possible. As they sat on his balcony, watching the city lights, Natalie leaned into him. "You're still a mess," she teased weakly. Wyatt kissed her hair. "Your mess." The true love test wasn't over, but for the first time, they both believed in a future. Rebuilding trust wasn't glamorous. It was Wyatt showing up, day after day, without flashy gestures. He helped Natalie paint her cafe walls, stayed up editing her business plan, and endured Tolstoy's judgmental glares. The humble heart she'd always loved was finally real, not a performance. One rainy afternoon, Natalie found Wyatt struggling with a leaky sink. "I could call a plumber," he offered, but she laughed. "No, fix it together." As they fumbled with wrenches, soaked and laughing, Natalie realized, love beyond wealth wasn't about grandness. It was about this, messy, imperfect, and true. Wyatt's board meeting still happened, but now he shared snippets with Natalie. "They want to acquire a tech startup," he'd say, and she'd joke, "Will that ruin our flea market Saturdays?" The fake identity was gone, replaced by a partnership where his billions weren't a secret, or a centerpiece. Natalie's cafe opening was Wyatt's proudest moment. He didn't fund it, she'd refused, but he stood in the crowd, clapping loudest as she welcomed guests. "This is hers," he told Jess, who grudgingly nodded. The unforgettable revelation. Love thrives when pride steps aside. That night, Natalie handed Wyatt a key. "To the cafe," she said. "You're not an investor. You're family." Wyatt's eyes welled. For a man who'd owned islands, this key was his greatest treasure. The secret millionaire had learned, some things are priceless. As they danced to a jukebox love song, Natalie whispered, "You're still terrible at fixing sinks." Wyatt grinned. "But I'm great at loving you." The emotional plot twist was complete, a billionaire and a barista, rewritten as equals. Walking home, Natalie asked, "Regret the lie?" Wyatt shook his head. "It led me to you." She squeezed his hand. "Just don't do it again." The true love test had ended, not with a shock, but a quiet, unshakable truth. Wyatt's grandest gesture wasn't diamonds or vacations, it was vulnerability. He rented the bookstore where they'd met and filled it with photos of their journey, messy pancakes, flea market finds, that first coffee-stained napkin. At the center, a single question, "Start over with me?" Natalie walked in, eyes wide. "You kept all this?" Wyatt nodded. Every moment mattered. She traced a photo of their rainy day meet-cute. "Even the lies?" His voice broke. "Especially those. They taught me what real feels like." He handed her a blank check. "Write any amount. Donate it, burn it, I don't care. I just want you." Natalie tore it up, smiling through tears. "I don't need your money. I need you." The shockingly romantic gesture had worked, not because of wealth, but despite it. They slow danced between the bookshelves, Natalia's head on his chest. "You're still a terrible dancer," she mumbled. Wyatt laughed. "But I'm learning." The humble heart had won, not through grandiosity, but through relentless, quiet love. Later, as they locked up the store, Natalie turned to him. "One condition, no more secrets." Wyatt kissed her palm. "Never again." The true love test had a new rule, transparency, no matter how uncomfortable. Walking home, Natalie teased, "Still hate suits?" Wyatt grinned. "Only if you're not there to untie my tie." The unexpected romance had evolved, from deception to a love built on scars and second chances. That night, Wyatt slept soundly for the first time in months. No nightmares, no guilt, just Natalie's steady breath beside him. The secret millionaire had found his fortune, a love no amount of money could replicate. Trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. Natalie knew this better than anyone. Wyatt's gestures were sweet, but they couldn't erase the months of deception. Still, there was something in his eyes, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "I need time," she told him one evening, her voice firm but not unkind. Wyatt nodded, his heart heavy but understanding. The true love test wasn't just about his actions, it was about her ability to forgive. Natalie threw herself into her work, using the cafe proposal as a distraction. But Wyatt's presence was everywhere, in the notes he left on her desk, the coffee he delivered every morning, and the way Tolstoy wagged his tail at the sound of his name. "He's trying," Jess said one day, eyeing Natalie over her laptop. "Maybe too hard." Natalie sighed. "Trying isn't enough. I need to know I can trust him again." Wyatt, meanwhile, was learning patience. He didn't push, didn't demand. Instead, he showed up, day after day, in small, meaningful ways. He helped Natalie paint the cafe walls, stayed up late proofreading her business plan, and even endured Tolstoy's slobbery kisses. The humble heart he'd admired in her was teaching him lessons he'd never learned in boardrooms. One rainy afternoon, Natalie found Wyatt waiting outside her apartment with an umbrella. "I thought you might need this," he said, handing it to her. She hesitated, then took it. "You don't have to do this, you know," she said softly. Wyatt shook his head. "I want to. Not because I have to, but because I care about you." The emotional plot twist was that his actions were starting to feel genuine, not just a desperate attempt to win her back. As weeks turned into months, Natalie began to see Wyatt in a new light. He wasn't just the billionaire who'd lied, he was the man who'd stayed up all night helping her edit her proposal, the man who'd laughed with her over burnt lasagna, the man who'd shown her that love wasn't about wealth. The unforgettable revelation was that forgiveness wasn't a one-time act, it was a choice, made every day. One evening, as they sat on her fire escape, Natalie turned to him. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Scared of getting hurt again." Wyatt nodded, his expression serious. "I'm scared too. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." Natalie's heart skipped a beat. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. The shockingly romantic moment was a reminder that love wasn't about perfection, it was about showing up, even when it was hard. As Wyatt walked home that night, he felt a sense of peace. Natalie hadn't said yes, but she hadn't said no, either. The secret millionaire was learning that love wasn't about wealth, it was about vulnerability, honesty, and the courage to keep trying. What happens next? He didn't know, but for the first time in weeks, he felt like they might just find their way back to each other. Natalie had always been a planner. But when it came to Wyatt, plans went out the window. One evening, after weeks of quiet reflection, she showed up at his penthouse unannounced. Wyatt opened the door, his eyes widening in surprise. "Natalie? Is everything okay?" She took a deep breath. "We need to talk." The shockingly romantic moment was here, and neither of them knew what would happen next. They sat on his balcony, the city lights twinkling below. Natalie fiddled with her coffee cup, her nerves evident. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice steady but soft. "About us. About everything." Wyatt's heart raced, but he stayed silent, letting her speak. The true love test had reached its climax, and he wasn't about to interrupt. Natalie looked at him, her eyes searching his. "I don't care about the money, Wyatt. I never did. What hurt was the lie. But I also see how hard you've been trying. And I can't ignore that." Wyatt's breath caught. Was this the moment he'd been waiting for? The emotional plot twist was that forgiveness wasn't just about forgetting, it was about moving forward. Natalie reached for his hand, her touch sending a jolt through him. "I'm not saying it's going to be easy. But I'm willing to try, if you are." Wyatt's eyes filled with tears. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "You're worth it." The unforgettable revelation was that love wasn't about perfection, it was about two people choosing each other, flaws and all. As they sat there, hand in hand, the weight of the past few months began to lift. Natalie smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "You know, you're still a mess," she teased. Wyatt laughed, the sound light and free. "Your mess," he replied, pulling her into a hug. The humble heart in her had forgiven him, and the secret millionaire finally felt like he was home. That night, as they watched the city lights from his balcony, Natalie turned to him. "What happens next?" she asked, her voice soft. Wyatt smiled, his heart full. "We take it one day at a time. Together." The shockingly romantic moment was a reminder that love wasn't about grand gestures, it was about the quiet, everyday moments that built a life together. As Natalie leaned into him, Wyatt felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The true love test had been brutal, but it had also been worth it. Because in the end, they'd found something money couldn't buy, a love that was real, raw, and unshakable. What happens next? They didn't know, but for the first time in a long time, they were excited to find out. Love, Wyatt realized, wasn't about grand gestures or lavish gifts. It was about the quiet moments, the way Natalie's eyes lit up when she talked about her cafe, the way she hummed off-key while cooking, the way she held his hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. The true love test had taught him that wealth couldn't buy happiness, but love. Love was priceless. Natalie, too, had learned something invaluable. Wyatt's wealth wasn't the problem, it was his fear of being loved for the wrong reasons. But as they rebuilt their relationship, she saw the man behind the fortune, kind, flawed, and fiercely loyal. The humble heart in her had forgiven him, and in doing so, she'd found a love that was deeper than she'd ever imagined. Their days were filled with simple joys, morning coffee on the balcony, late-night conversations about everything and nothing, and the occasional argument over whose turn it was to walk Tolstoy. The emotional plot twist was that love wasn't about perfection, it was about two people choosing each other, day after day. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching a movie, Natalie turned to him. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Pretending to be someone you're not?" Wyatt thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No. Because it led me to you." Natalie smiled, her heart full. The unforgettable revelation was that love wasn't about where you started, it was about where you ended up. As their relationship grew stronger, Wyatt began to use his wealth for good. He funded Natalie's cafe, not as a grand gesture, but because he believed in her dream. Together, they created a space that reflected their shared values, warmth, community, and a little bit of chaos. The shockingly romantic twist was that love had transformed them both, for the better. Natalie, meanwhile, continued to teach Wyatt the value of simplicity. She showed him that joy could be found in the smallest things, a perfectly brewed cup of coffee, a walk in the park, or a quiet evening at home. The true love test had taught him that wealth wasn't the key to happiness, love was. As they stood together on the balcony of their new cafe, watching the sunset, Wyatt turned to Natalie. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft. "For giving me a second chance." Natalie smiled, her eyes shining. "Thank you for showing me that love is worth fighting for." The secret millionaire had found his happily ever after, and it was richer than anything money could buy. The cafe's grand opening was a whirlwind of laughter, music, and the smell of freshly baked pastries. Natalie stood behind the counter, her heart swelling with pride as she watched customers fill the space. Wyatt moved through the crowd, refilling coffee cups and chatting with guests. To anyone else, they were just two people running a cafe. But to each other, they were proof that love beyond wealth wasn't just possible, it was extraordinary. As the night wound down, Wyatt pulled Natalie aside. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "This place is amazing." Natalie smiled, her eyes shining. "We did it," she corrected. "None of this would have happened without you." The humble heart in her had always seen the man behind the fortune, and now, Wyatt finally saw himself through her eyes. They stepped outside, the cool night air a welcome relief from the bustling cafe. Natalie leaned into Wyatt, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" she asked softly. Wyatt chuckled. "All the time. It's crazy, isn't it? A billionaire and a barista." Natalie laughed. "More like a secret millionaire and the woman who saw through his disguise." As they walked home, hand in hand, Wyatt felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The true love test had been brutal, but it had also been worth it. Because in the end, they'd found something money couldn't buy, a love that was real, raw, and unshakable. The emotional plot twist was that love wasn't about where you started, it was about where you ended up. Natalie, too, had found something she hadn't known she was looking for. Wyatt wasn't just her partner, he was her best friend, her biggest supporter, and the person who made her believe in happily ever after. The unforgettable revelation was that love wasn't about perfection, it was about two people choosing each other, day after day. As they reached her apartment, Wyatt turned to her. "What happens next?" he asked, his voice soft. Natalie smiled, her heart full. "We take it one day at a time. Together." The shockingly romantic moment was a reminder that love wasn't about grand gestures, it was about the quiet, everyday moments that built a life together. As Natalie leaned into him, Wyatt felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The true love test had been brutal, but it had also been worth it. Because in the end, they'd found something money couldn't buy, a love that was real, raw, and unshakable. What happens next? They didn't know, but for the first time in a long time, they were excited to find out. And that's the story of how a billionaire learned that love isn't about wealth, it's about being real. Did you expect this ending? Share in the comments, would you forgive someone who lied to protect their heart, or is trust non-negotiable? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that challenge what we think we know about love, money, and destiny. Because sometimes, the greatest unforgettable revelation is that the truth, no matter how shocking, can lead to the most beautiful beginnings. Until next time, remember, love isn't about what you have, but who you choose to be with. See you in the next video.